away the PIP from everybody who's currently claiming it. We're saying we'll keep PIP, but we'll reform it. And those people who shouldn't be getting it for things like mild anxiety, depression, tennis elbow, then yes, they will be reassessed. And some of those people will see it withdrawn. But that is a subset of that number. And look, at the moment, I'll give you a stat, 214 people are being signed on to PIP every single day for mild anxiety.
214, was that?
214.
240.
That is just crazy. We've got...
What is up, everybody? Harry here. This is Nick Ferrari on LBC with Robert Jenrick, Reform UK's Treasury spokesperson, laying out the party's welfare reform plan and mandatory community service for the long-term unemployed, restricting benefits to British citizens and tightening PIP eligibility for mental health claims. Ferrari then takes three very different caller reactions. One calling it isn't paid at minimum wage, one calling it a genuine lifeline, one calling the whole thing a scam. There are also several specific numbers in here. The £22 billion figure, the 214 people a day PIP stat, the EU claimant comparison, worth checking properly. Let's get in.
Now, if you'll accept that broadly it would appear all political parties agree there needs to be some kind of reform within our benefits, what was the reform? Well, it was spelled out by the party's Treasury spokesperson and MP for Newark, Robert Jenrick, who joins me now. Thank you for coming on. Mr Jenrick, the reviews are in for the Daily Telegraph. Reform's benefits plan is a promising start. Meanwhile, for the Times, Robert Jenrick's plan to cut payments is stronger on headlines than on savings. They say you've not gone into enough detail. How would you respond to that charge? Good morning.
Well, good morning, Nick. Well, we've published a 50-page document, which is more than I think any other party has done. The Tory party published a 2- or 3-page document a year ago and doesn't seem to have done anything in the time in between. So I'd push back pretty strongly, to be honest, Nick. We've worked with some serious experts, people who've worked in the DWP and job centres. In fact, some of the authors of the reforms that the coalition government did back in the day through a great charity, the Centre for Social Justice. So it's a very serious plan. And at heart of it is three big things. Number one, we're saying that if you've been off work claiming job seekers allowance for a prolonged period of time, a year, then in addition to looking for that job, you should also be giving back to the local community, working 20 hours a week doing things like litter picking, working in a library, helping out in care homes and so on and so forth. No more something for nothing. Secondly, we're saying that unless you're a British citizen, you shouldn't be claiming benefits because £22 billion a year is being spent on that. We just can't afford it. And it's not fair to British people that their taxes are going for people who aren't even citizens of our country. And then lastly, we are saying that whilst we'll always protect the most vulnerable people, we've got to help those people off benefits and back into work because the numbers are just soaring at the moment. You know, the numbers of people claiming disability benefit for mental health, for example, Nick, have doubled since the pandemic. If we could just get back to where we were before the pandemic, we would save billions and billions of pounds.
Well, let's work our way through that. The idea of people working, picking up litter. Why are you treating the unemployed almost as if they're criminals?
We're not. In fact,
that's what people do in community service, Mr. Jenrick. You'll be aware of that as a former shadow
the
justice
list of jobs, Nick, that we've published in the document are very broad. They're not demeaning jobs. They include things like working in libraries, doing clerical tasks for local councils. They're tasks which many people could do. In most cases, they don't require particular qualifications.
But would you want your grandmother or grandfather looked after in a care home by some of these folks?
Well, they wouldn't be doing the actual care work because that would be a skilled job. They might be doing like an administrative task, for example, for the local council or alongside the care home.
Mr. Jones?
Well, some will and some won't, but that's the point, isn't it? You can train people. And look, I know what when you're unemployed, my dad was made redundant when I was a child, and to watch somebody who was a very proud person suddenly be sat around the house, not worried about the future, it's a very, very challenging time for people. And to be then given the opportunity to be out of the house, meeting people, having the routine that comes with having to be, at work at 9 a.m. in the morning, I think that's actually very valuable to the individual as well as to the community.
And look, let me say, and most of my listeners would agree, this is something that needs reform, with a small r. It's whether reform is going to work. Coming back to that, there is the suggestion, as I think you were, as regards the British citizens, that our European nationals living in this country would no longer be entitled to benefits. But that would be in the same for now our folk living over in Europe, wouldn't it? It's suggested we'll need a renegotiation of some part of the Brexit deal. Mr. Jenrick.
We would do. You're absolutely right. There's a number of different ways.
Do you think the country's ready for that, Mr. Jenrick?
I think that there's no great desire in the country, you're right, Nick, to get back into some kind of Brexit war of the kind that we saw in the last 10 years. However, there's a number of areas in which I think most people agree the Brexit deal, which I don't think was a particularly good deal, but nonetheless, it is not working. The Labour government also agree with this. They're trying to renegotiate certain points at the moment. So I don't think it's unreasonable to do that. And just so your listeners understand, there's a big disparity at the moment where there are far more EU citizens living in the UK claiming benefits than there are Brits within the EU doing the same.
What are the numbers? Do you have the numbers to hand?
There's about 4 times more EU citizens in the UK claiming benefits than vice versa. That's partly because just sheer numbers. It's partly because there are different types of people. A lot of Brits living overseas are retired people in places like Spain, as you can imagine, who will be still getting their British state pension and not reliant on benefits in that country. And at the moment, a quarter of universal credit claimants, 700,000 people, are EU citizens. And that's a huge amount of money. And I don't think we can afford it. But I also don't think it's fair that someone's working hard in the UK, a British citizen, and they're paying for somebody who isn't even a Brit to get those benefits. And so we're saying that we would stop that and we'd use that money for things that Brits actually want, like maybe a tax cut or improving the quality of our own public services.
Well, as I say, there is a desire to put the situation right. It's whether you've got it right. Just lastly, you won't probably have had time to have sight of Fraser Nelson, the journalist who writes in The Times, who's actually looked at your constituency of Newark. Your attack on PIP claimants, there are 6,010 living in your constituency. You'll know better than most that the last time you fought that, your majority was 3,571. Have you just put yourself out of office?
Well, Fraser's a bit of an oddball because he says this is a really important issue. Politicians need to be talking about it. He's very critical of previous governments, Tory and Labour, for not tackling it. And then he seems to be saying, when Reform actually come up with serious and actually quite challenging policies to deal with the big issues facing the country, we should run scared of those issues. It is certainly true.
Well, he may be an oddball, but he's certainly a mathematician. You'd be out of office, as would Nigel Farage. He's got 10,440 PIPs in claimants, and of course you know what his majority was. He wouldn't have won, and neither would Richard Tice. So Fraser's got his sums right, Mr. Jenrick.
Well, I think he's wrong on the point that because issues are difficult,
well, they're not going to vote for you if you cancel their PIP, are they?
You shouldn't take. Well, that's the argument to do what the Labour Party has done, which is nothing. It's the argument to do what the Tory Party did, which was allow the bill to explode. But on the actual numbers, that's not quite right, because we're not suggesting that we take away the PIP from everybody who's currently claiming it. We're saying we'll keep PIP, but we'll reform it. And those people who shouldn't be getting it for things like mild anxiety, depression, tennis elbow, then yes, they will be reassessed. And some of those people will see it withdrawn. But that is a subset of that number. And look, at the moment, I'll give you a stat, 214 people are being signed on to PIP every single day for mild anxiety.
214, was that?
214.
240.
That is just crazy. We've got to get that number down. And look, if Reform is being criticised for having very serious and radical policies to address one of the biggest challenges facing the country today, then I hold my hands up. That I think is a good charge to be levelling against us. We want to be a radical government to turn the country around.
Grateful for your time this morning. Thank you. Giving us a little more detail on what you spelt out yesterday. Robert Jenrick is Reform's UK Treasury spokesperson. John in Crystal Palace, thank you for holding. John, your take on what you've heard so far. Good morning.
Yeah, hi. Why don't you pay the people minimum wage for 20 hours?
Pardon?
A week.
Sorry, why don't you what?
Why don't you pay them minimum wage for the 20 hours a week they're going to be working.
Oh, the ones that they want to
jobs.
pick up. Well, they would argue. I think Reform would argue. Well, they're already getting some form of income, some form of benefit, so that will come off their welfare payments. That's in return for getting their benefit payments.
But they're not. They're not prisoners. You know.
No, that's the point I made. I actually said they're not prisoners. Yes.
Some are applying for jobs, 100 jobs a week. You know.
Yes, but their argument is that they've been now trying to get a job for a year. They need to give something back, and that is what they see as giving something back. Why
don't they ever talk about people? You've got 1.3 million people go to work full time and have to get universal credit until the companies to pay a proper wage. They never save some money on the benefits. Why don't do that?
So what is it? Okay, what is it you would want to hear them say? Just outline it a bit more, John.
You've got 1.3 million people go to work full time
and still rely on you.
Still have to get universal credit because they can't afford to live. Why don't they tell the companies to pay a proper wage like they should do?
Well, I suppose they would. Again, they're not in power, but they would point to the fact that they do. There is government legislation as regards to it. Go on.
But they've got nothing to say. They've got nothing to say about people who are getting slave labour. Nothing to say at all.
Well, I think what they're saying is that they would want to ensure that we don't find ourselves with a bill of £400 billion. You wouldn't want the government trying to run private companies. They struggle enough to do what they meant to do, don't they? You wouldn't want that, John, would you?
No, I wouldn't, no. But you've got people in work, full-time work, getting benefit. That is absurd.
Yes, I think the situation is absurd. The whole thing probably needs looking at. OK, John, you're not too impressed with reforms. Thank you for that. Peter in Leytonstone. Peter, are you equally pessimistic about its chances? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Hiya.
Hello.
How are you? Hi.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Well, Robert Jenrick has just offered them a lifeline, hasn't he? You know.
Sorry, them. Who's them?
Well, the unemployed youth over a year who have been unemployed for a year. Mm-hmm. He's offered them a lifeline to get into a routine. You know, and as for not getting paid, they're getting paid by the taxpayer.
Well, of course, John's argument is that you should give them minimum wage.
No, that's not. The idea is to get them into a routine. He's offered them various roles. Doesn't have to be demeaning. To get into a routine.
How would you regard picking up litter? Wouldn't you say that's a tad demeaning? No.
Yeah, I would a little bit. But there's other roles that you can be offered, isn't there? You know, it's not just that. You're going to the bottom of the pile. He's offered them libraries. There's lots of other roles.
If you're running a library and these people suddenly arrive and they're told, look, they've got to do this, otherwise they're going to have their benefits stopped, do you think they're going to give it 1,000% effort to, I don't know, move the books around, bring in a new filing system, input something on a database, whatever it might be? Do you really think so?
Well, it's up to the individual. If I had my time back and I was offered something as a routine to get me out the house, get me in talking to people, having a discussion, this needs doing, that needs doing. That's what work's about. You go in the morning, don't you, and speak to your production team.
I do.
Exactly the same. You can get paid for it.
I do. Probably a little bit more than I would if I was on benefits, I imagine. Peter, thank you. So it's mixed pictures, isn't it, so far? Let's take one more call on this. Richard in Manchester, what's your take on the reforms?
Basically, I reckon it's, I think it's it's a bit of a scam, really, to be honest with you. The way
Tell me how it's a scam.
The way everything's going, nobody knows exactly what's going on. It's like myself. I'm a worker. Like everybody else out there, they're workers.
Well, not everyone is, unfortunately.
But what I'm saying is, if we can't, there's something happen to us, you're telling me that we've got to go out there doing litter picking or anything like that with the money that we've put in. You're telling us that we've got to do that?
Their take is if you've been claiming for more than a year, yes, you'd have to go out and clean up the park, pick up litter, work in a care home, whatever it might be. Richard?
Yeah, but I can't see that somehow, because obviously you're putting in £1,000 into the government, and if you can't work for, just say, disability reason, and everybody has got a disability.
Well,
so what I'm saying is why have we got to do the litter picking? Sorry.
Yes, right. Yeah, go on.
Why should we do that?
certainly if you've paid in, as you rightly say, through your taxes, it's a bit of an ask, isn't it? It would be, lastly, Richard, if you'd spent 12 months not being able to get another job. That's what reform would say. That's why they would have you out there picking up the litter or working in the care home. You haven't got anything in 12 months. I'm fortunate I'm not currently put on myself on the job market. How realistic is that?
Well, the way the immigration's going at the moment, they're giving them jobs and everything as well.
I don't know that we are, because in many instances they don't have the necessary paperwork to get the jobs, but certainly it is an issue, the people who are arriving. All right, Richard, thank you.
Watch the specific 214 a day figure Jenrick cites, because it's close enough to independently track numbers to be treated as roughly accurate rather than invented. Center for Social Justice Analysis found around 250 people a day were being awarded PIP for anxiety and mood disorders as of mid-2025. And separate DWP commissioned research found monthly new awards for anxiety and depression rose from about 2,500 a month in 2019 to roughly 8,800 a month in 2024, which works out to close to 290 a day. Jenrick's figure sits in that same general range. Where it's worth being more careful is his specific framing. 214 people signed on for mild anxiety. Official statistics don't actually categorize PIP awards by severity as mild versus otherwise. They're recorded by primary condition. So that specific qualifier is doing some persuasive work that the underlying data doesn't quite support in that precise form. Even though the overall daily award rate for anxiety-related conditions is genuinely in that ballpark. The claim that PIP claims for anxiety specifically have doubled since before the pandemic checks out well against the data. One detailed newspaper analysis of government figures found claims for anxiety disorders rose from roughly 230,000 in 2020 to nearly 462,000 by early 2025, essentially doubling over that period. And total PIP caseloads with a mental health condition as the primary driver have grown by around 29% just between 2021 and 2024. So that specific claim is solidly grounded, not an exaggeration. The £22 billion figure for non-citizen benefit spending and the specific claim that EU citizens claiming UK benefits outnumber Brits claiming EU benefits by roughly 4 to 1 are the kind of precise figures that would benefit from direct verification against Home Office or DWP data before being treated as settled. And I wasn't able to independently confirm those specific numbers with confidence. The three callers each raised genuinely distinct and legitimate points worth separating rather than treating as one undifferentiated pushback. John's question, why the policy doesn't pay minimum wage for the 20 hours, and his separate point about 1.3 million people working full-time while still needing universal credit top-ups are two different critiques, one about the community service scheme specifically, one about wage levels generally. And Jenrick's answer mostly addresses neither directly. Peter's more sympathetic framing, that structure and routine have real value regardless of pay, is also a genuine and commonly cited finding in employment. Research on long-term unemployment. Richard's concern about disability and fairness for people who've paid in through taxes is a third separate question about who the scheme is actually meant to apply to, distinct from both other callers' points. It's worth pulling out the actual underlying disagreement between Jenrick and the callers, separate from any individual statistic. Nobody in this exchange disputes that the current system has real problems: rising costs, growing mental health claims, working people still needing top-up support. The genuine disagreement is over which specific intervention addresses the actual cause. Jenrick's plan targets claimants directly through work requirements and stricter assessment, while John's alternative targets employers through wage regulation instead. Those are two different theories about where the underlying problem originates, and this call doesn't really adjudicate between them. It mostly just has each side stating its preferred starting point. If breakdowns like this are useful to you, get subscribed to Harry Unfiltered, and I'll keep checking the specifics as carefully as this deserves, one interview at a time.